I pressed the needle through ivory silk, watching it slip beneath my fingers as if it knew where to go without asking. 6 months had passed like this, long evenings under the dim glow of my kitchen lamp, after the dishes were washed and the house had fallen into silence. My hands, no longer as steady as they were decades ago, carried the memory of countless stitches I'd sewn through the years, hemming pants, patching holes, altering dresses, just to stretch a dollar further. But this dress was different. This wasn't about survival or practicality. This was my love story stitched into fabric, a gift for my daughter Rachel on her wedding day. French seams tucked secrets inside their folds, pearls hand-sewn one by one, until my fingertips cracked and bled. Every stitch carried a prayer that she would feel loved, cherished, radiant when she walked down that aisle. At 62, a widow for nearly 20 years, I had no riches left to pass on, no grand inheritance to offer, only this gown, my legacy woven in silk and devotion. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Each yard of silk had cost me more than 3 weeks of grocery money, but I told myself it was worth it. I clipped coupons, skipped small comforts, and stretched soups thinner so I could buy the finest fabric. My body ached at night, but my heart felt alive, guided by a purpose that carried me through the loneliness. I remembered my own wedding dress, one I had sewn 40 years ago, with hands still full of youth and eyes unburdened by grief. That dress had walked me into a future with my husband, Tom, a future that ended far too soon when his heart gave out and left me alone to raise Rachel at just 12 years old. Every dart, every pleat I shaped into this gown was whispered with the ghosts of sacrifices I had made for her since that day. The gown stretched across my dining table like moonlight captured and held still. I would pause sometimes just to look at it, my breath catching at the thought that my girl would soon wear something fashioned entirely by her mother's hands. It wasn't simply fabric and thread, it was the embodiment of decades of resilience, love, and quiet labor. I thought of Rachel as a child, crawling into my bed during thunderstorms, her hair damp with tears, her small voice begging me not to let go. I had held her then, just as I was holding this dream together now. The dress became my way of saying what words never quite captured. You are loved beyond measure. You are the best of me. You carry my heart wherever you go. When I wrapped it in layers of acid-free tissue, just as my own mother once taught me, I did so with the reverence one reserves for sacred things. For me, this dress was not just a wedding gown. It was my offering, my proof that even in a modest life, love could take shape in something beautiful, something that would outlast me. The morning of Rachel's wedding arrived draped in sunshine that seemed far too bright for the heaviness I carried in my chest. I had woken before dawn, smoothing once more the ivory folds of the gown that had consumed my life for half a year. It lay across my bed like something holy, glowing in the early light that spilled through my curtains. I whispered a prayer, not for myself but for my daughter, that she would feel in every stitch the love and history I had sewn into the dress. Carefully, I folded it into its protective layers of tissue, then slid it inside the garment bag. My hands trembled not with nerves but with reverence. This was the moment I had been waiting for. To see Rachel radiant in the dress her mother had made, to watch her glide down the aisle as if carried on the wings of all the years we had survived together. The Fairmont Hotel towered before me like some extravagant wedding cake carved in stone and marble. Its polished glass doors gleamed, the doormen in crisp uniforms opening them with the kind of flourish reserved for royalty. My old sedan felt terribly out of place among the sleek black cars that lined the entrance, each one more expensive than the house I had raised Rachel in. I could already feel how much this world belonged to Margaret Collins, my daughter's soon-to-be mother-in-law. Margaret had chosen the venue, the caterer, the photographer, Every detail had been orchestrated with the precision of a general preparing for battle. I had offered to contribute in small ways, flowers perhaps, or handmade touches to the decor. But Margaret had waved me off with that smile of hers, the kind that looked pleasant enough, yet carried the sharpness of a blade. "Don't worry about it, Linda. We have everything handled," she had said, as if my attempts at generosity were quaint but unnecessary. Carrying the garment bag felt like carrying a secret treasure into enemy territory. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I entered the lobby, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space and chandeliers dripping crystals overhead. The air smelled faintly of lilies and wealth. I followed signs toward the bridal suite, each step echoing louder in my ears. My pulse quickened as I approached the door, behind which I could already hear a buzz of voices and laughter. When I entered, the scene was chaos, but a chaos choreographed to perfection. Makeup artists leaned over shining palettes worth more than my month's rent. A hairstylist's scissors flashed like weapons of artistry, strands of Rachel's dark hair falling away before being curled into sleek perfection. The photographer hovered constantly, his camera clicking like an impatient clock, capturing every forced giggle, every manufactured moment of intimacy between bridesmaids. At the center of it all sat my daughter, my Rachel, her skin powdered smooth, her eyes painted until she resembled not the child I once held through thunderstorms, but a porcelain doll being prepared for display. Her head lifted when she saw me. "Mom," she said, her tone clipped, hurried, the way it often was when she needed something but already anticipated disappointment. "You're here. Good. We're almost ready for the dress." I clutched the garment bag tighter. 6 months of evenings after grading papers. 6 months of saving every penny. 6 months of pouring every bit of myself into this gown. It all condensed into this one fragile moment. "I brought the dress," I said softly, my voice quivering with pride and love. Across the room, Margaret Collins turned. She wore a tailored navy suit that looked custom-made, pearls gleaming at her throat, her hair styled into waves that spoke of daily salon appointments. Her eyes landed on the garment bag with a flicker of something I recognized instantly. Dismissal. Even before she had seen what was inside. "Oh," she said, her lips curving into that paper-thin smile. "The dress you made? How thoughtful." The word hung in the air like a diplomatic apology for an inconvenience. Still, I unzipped the bag with careful fingers, my heart pounding. As the silk emerged, the room hushed. The gown cascaded like water given shape, pearls catching the light in quiet constellations. For one heartbeat, I thought I saw admiration soften even Margaret's eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Rachel's voice broke the silence first. "It's," she began, then faltered, glancing toward Margaret, as though waiting for permission to finish the thought. "It's very handmade," Margaret supplied smoothly, stepping closer as though inspecting damaged goods. She touched the fabric between 2 manicured fingers, her mouth pursing as if she'd tasted something sour. "The detail work is quite rustic." 6 months of bloodied fingertips and sleepless nights reduced to that single word. I felt something shift deep inside my chest, a door quietly closing. "Rachel, darling," Margaret continued, her tone sugared with false kindness. "Perhaps we should consider the backup option we discussed. The Vera Wang from the boutique. It's far more appropriate for the photographs." Rachel's eyes darted between me and her mother-in-law-to-be. I saw her weighing her options like a merchant calculating profit and loss. And then I saw it. The exact moment she chose the path away from me. "Mom," she said, her voice faltering, "I think maybe we should go with the other dress." This one is just not quite right for the venue." The words pierced sharper than any needle I had ever handled. In that instant, 23 years of scraped knees I had bandaged, nightmares I had soothed, dreams I had encouraged, all of it unraveled in the span of a sentence. Carefully, deliberately, I folded the dress back into its tissue paper, the motions as precise as if I were laying a loved one to rest. "Of course," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Whatever makes you happy." I stepped into the hallway, closing the door just enough to give them privacy, though not so tight that I couldn't still hear the voices within. "Thank God you came to your senses," Margaret's voice carried, crisp and clear. "Can you imagine the photographs? Everyone would wonder where on earth that dress came from." And then Rachel's laugh. A nervous, brittle laugh. But laughter all the same. "If anyone asks, I'll just say it didn't fit. It looked like something from a thrift store anyway." The words struck like physical blows. 6 months of devotion reduced to thrift store ridicule, followed by the sound of my daughter's relieved giggle. Through the partially open door, I caught a glimpse of Rachel stepping into the Vera Wang gown. Margaret zipped it up with smug satisfaction while the photographer snapped away, capturing the transformation from daughter to daughter-in-law. My creation lay forgotten in the corner, discarded like unwanted wrapping paper. I walked back in, lifting the garment bag with new resolve. "I'll take this home," I said, my voice even. "Oh, Mom," Rachel offered weakly, her eyes darting toward Margaret. "Maybe I can wear it to the rehearsal dinner." Her words felt like consolation prizes, hollow and insincere. "No," I replied simply. "That won't be necessary." I leaned down and kissed her forehead, inhaling the scent of expensive hairspray and borrowed perfume scents that smelled nothing like the child who once crawled into my bed for comfort. "Have a beautiful wedding, sweetheart." As I walked down the thickly carpeted corridor, Margaret's voice followed behind me, smug and satisfied. Well, that was easier than I expected. Sometimes people just need to accept reality. The elevator doors closed, sealing me away from their world. In my arms, wrapped in tissue and wounded pride, lay not just a dress, but the remnants of a chapter in my life I realized was ending. Outside, the spring air was sharp, filled with exhaust and possibility. I carried the gown back to my car, placing it gently across the back seat, like precious cargo. As I drove away, past the neighborhood where I had raised Rachel, past the school where I had taught for 37 years, the landmarks of my life seemed smaller somehow, as if I had been viewing them through the wrong lens all this time. The rejection had not broken me. Breaking implies something can be mended. This felt more like evolution, a shedding of skin too tight to contain me any longer. What lay ahead, I did not yet know. But I understood one truth as clear as the pearls still sewn into the bodice of the dress beside me. Love without respect is nothing more than servitude. I drove home from the hotel in silence, the kind that presses against your chest until even breathing feels like a betrayal. The city streets blurred past my windshield, storefronts, stoplights, people carrying on with their lives, oblivious to the small death I was carrying in the back seat. In the rearview mirror, the garment bag lay like a shroud. My daughter's rejection zipped neatly inside. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to roll down the window and let the dress tumble out onto the asphalt, to leave it behind like something rotten. But my hands stayed tight on the steering wheel. 6 months of labor, of sacrifice, of love, couldn't be abandoned so easily. When I stepped into my house, the walls greeted me with their familiar creaks, the smell of lemon polish lingering faintly from the day before. Everything looked unchanged. The yellow paint in the kitchen, the framed photographs on the hallway shelf, the small pile of unopened mail by the door. Yet I felt different, as though the ground beneath me had shifted in ways too subtle to explain. I carried the dress into the dining room, where 6 months earlier it had been born under the yellow glow of a table lamp. Gently, I laid it across the table again, smoothing the silk with trembling hands. My fingers hesitated on the pearls, still catching the light like frozen stars. And then the grief came. Not the kind that bursts out in sobs, but the quiet kind, heavy and suffocating. I slid into the chair and buried my face in my palms, the silence of the house pressing against me until it felt unbearable. I could still hear Rachel's laugh echoing in my ears. Thin, nervous, but laughter nonetheless, as she dismissed my work as thrift store material. That sound cut deeper than any cruel word Margaret Collins could have uttered. Because it was my daughter, my only child. The girl I had carried in my arms through thunderstorms. The one whose scraped knees I had bandaged. Whose nightmares I had soothed with lullabies. I didn't cry that night. The tears refused to come, as though my body was too tired even for grief. Instead, I sat staring at the dress for hours, the silence punctuated only by the ticking clock on the wall. Eventually, I folded it carefully back into the tissue paper, tucking it away as if I were sealing a wound. Then I went to bed, lying awake until dawn, my body still and my mind replaying every word, every laugh, every glance exchanged in that hotel suite. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of living, making tea, watering the plants, paying bills. Yet everything felt muted, as though someone had turned down the volume on my life. The phone rang once or twice, but I let it go unanswered. Likely well-meaning friends or neighbors, calling with curiosity thinly disguised as concern. I couldn't bear to explain, couldn't bear to hear the pity in their voices. But each time I passed the dining room, my eyes were drawn to the garment bag resting on the table. It felt alive somehow, pulsing with memory, demanding to be seen. Finally, on the third day, I unzipped it once more. The gown spilled out, luminous, even in the muted afternoon light. I stared at it for a long time, and slowly, something inside me began to shift. At first, I saw only failure. The dress had not fulfilled its purpose. It had not been worn by the daughter for whom it was intended. In that way, it felt like evidence of my inadequacy, proof that my love was somehow lacking, not enough to overcome the disdain of a wealthy mother-in-law or the insecurities of a bride caught between two worlds. But as the minutes stretched into hours, my eyes softened. I began to notice the things I had once overlooked. The evenness of the French seams, invisible from the outside but strong enough to last generations. The way the pearls caught the light in delicate spirals across the bodice. The precision of the hand-rolled hem, so fine it could never have been produced by machine. This wasn't failure. It was skill. It was artistry. It was me. My mother's voice echoed in memory, as clear as if she were sitting beside me. Linda, you have the hands of an artist. Don't waste them on other people's dreams. She had said those words decades ago, when I was young and restless, too consumed with raising a family and making ends meet to listen. But now, they rang like prophecy. I rose from the chair and circled the table, studying the gown from every angle as though seeing it for the first time. It was beautiful, not perfect. Perhaps perfection was a lie sold in boutiques with 5-figure price tags, but beautiful in its authenticity. It held the story of my life in every stitch. The sacrifices of a widow, the determination of a mother, the quiet persistence of a woman who had never been afforded extravagance, yet refused to surrender to mediocrity. By the fourth day, the weight of humiliation began to lift, replaced by something unexpected: pride. I boiled water for tea, sat at the table, and studied the gown with a notebook beside me. For the first time in years, I made sketches ideas for different bodice shapes, sleeve variations, alternative bead patterns. It was as though the dress had unlocked a door I hadn't realized was still within me. A door leading back to the young woman who once dreamed of designing clothes before life demanded practicality. I began to imagine what else my hands could create if given the chance. Not just for Rachel, but for women like me. For women who didn't see themselves reflected in glossy magazines or runway shows. Women who deserved to feel beautiful in their own skin, regardless of age, shape, or bank account. That night, as I sipped my tea and watched the steam curl upward like incense, I realized something profound. Rachel's rejection had not diminished me. If anything, it had freed me. For so long, I had defined myself solely as her mother, measuring my worth by her approval. But now, faced with her dismissal, I saw clearly that my value was not contingent on her acceptance. The gown was proof. Proof that I was more than a mother, more than a widow, more than a retired teacher scraping by on a pension. I was an artist. The wound was still there, raw and tender, but it no longer bled. Instead, it began to transform into something else resolve. By the 5th day, I had moved the sewing machine back onto the dining table. I pulled out fabric scraps from the closet, boxes of buttons and zippers and lace I had hoarded over the years, too thrifty to discard. I began experimenting, stitching small pieces, testing new techniques. Hours passed unnoticed. The whir of the needle, a soothing rhythm, the fabric warm beneath my hands. For the first time in decades, I felt alive, as though the silence of my home was no longer empty but full of possibility. When I finally set the needle down, I looked at the gown again. It was no longer just Rachel's rejected dress. It was my beginning, a declaration of independence, stitched in silk and pearl. The hurt remained, yes, but woven through it now was something stronger. The certainty that my story was not over. In fact, it was just beginning. I folded the gown carefully once more, not as a burial but as preservation, a promise to myself that it would not be forgotten. Then I made a silent vow. If Rachel could not see the value of what I had created, someone else would. Somewhere, out there, was a woman who would wear this dress with the reverence it deserved, who would see not thrift store fabric but the devotion of a mother, the craft of an artist. And when that day came, I would be ready. The rejection that had once felt like a wound now pulsed like a heartbeat, urging me forward. For 62 years, I had played the roles expected of me: daughter, wife, mother, teacher. But sitting there in my dining room, surrounded by the tools of my craft and the quiet hum of possibility, I understood with startling clarity. It was time to play the role I was born for. I was Linda Harris, seamstress, artist, woman reborn in the ashes of rejection. And though I did not yet know where this path would lead, I knew one thing for certain. The next stitch I sewed would not be for survival or sacrifice. It would be for me. It was the 6th day after Rachel's wedding when the doorbell rang. I hadn't been expecting anyone. In truth, I had been avoiding people, preferring the quiet company of my sewing machine and the half-finished sketches scattered across the dining table. I padded to the door in my slippers, bracing myself for a neighbor delivering polite condolences wrapped in curiosity. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman balancing a casserole dish, her dark curls escaping from a messy bun. Her face carried an expression both nervous and determined, the kind of look that said she wouldn't leave until someone opened the door. "Mrs. Harris?" she asked when I cracked it open. Her voice carried a warmth that felt familiar somehow. "I'm Emily Reed. I live above the bakery on Maple Street." I, I thought you might need some company. I blinked, searching my memory. Rachel had once mentioned an Emily years ago, a girl from her college coffee shop days. They'd studied together, I think, before Rachel's circle narrowed to the polished professionals her husband preferred. Emily held out the casserole dish like an offering. Chicken enchiladas. My grandmother's recipe. I heard, well, I heard about what happened at the wedding. On. My breath caught. You heard? Her eyes softened. Rachel called me. She was a little drunk, crying. She told me about the dress. Emily's jaw tightened. And what she said about it. For the first time in nearly a week, a small smile tugged at my lips. Come in, I said. I was just making coffee. Inside. Emily stopped short. Her gaze locked on the gown, still spread across the dining table, like moonlight caught in fabric. She moved toward it slowly, reverently, as though approaching a shrine. Oh my God, she whispered, then clapped a hand over her mouth. Sorry, but Mrs. Harris, this is incredible. She circled the table, her fingers hovering inches above the silk, afraid to touch. The beadwork alone, it's museum quality. How long did this take you? 6 months, I said quietly. Emily's eyes widened. 6 months, and she called it thrift store quality? That's. She broke off, shaking her head in fury. This is not thrift store work. This is couture. The word hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. I had never thought of myself in such terms, but hearing it from someone who understood, someone with trained eyes, made something stir deep in my chest. Recognition. You know about construction techniques, I said carefully. Emily flushed slightly. I went to fashion school for about a year. I wanted to design clothes, real clothes for real women. But my dad got sick, and I had to come home to help with the family restaurant. I've been waitressing ever since. I still do alterations on the side, but nothing like this. She gestured toward the gown. I've never seen work like this outside of a museum. Her words poured into the quiet spaces in me that had long gone empty, filling them with something I hadn't felt in years. Validation. We sat in the kitchen, the enchiladas still steaming, and drank coffee while Emily peppered me with questions. She wanted to know everything. How I made French seams lie flat. How I set in sleeves without puckers. How I'd achieved the delicate spirals of pearls across the bodice. She listened as though every detail mattered, nodding eagerly, her enthusiasm filling the room like sunlight. You know, she said after a while, her fingers tapping her mug, I have a cousin, Anna. She's getting married in 3 months. Budget's basically non-existent. She's a social worker, and her fiancé teaches kindergarten. They've been looking at polyester disasters online for under $200. She's been crying about it for weeks. I tilted my head. That's difficult, I murmured, though I could already feel where this was going. She's about Rachel's size, maybe a little taller. Emily's eyes flicked toward the dress again. Hopeful. My heart gave a painful thud. You think she'd want to wear a rejected gown? One my own daughter wouldn't touch? Emily's gaze held mine, firm. I think she'd cry with gratitude to wear a dress that beautiful. This isn't a cast-off, Mrs. Harris. This is a masterpiece waiting for the right bride. The words lingered in the air long after she left that evening. Casserole dish washed and returned. I sat at the dining table long into the night, staring at the gown, wondering if perhaps fate was nudging me towards something I hadn't yet dared to imagine. The next afternoon, Emily returned, this time with Anna in tow. Anna was in her early 30s, her olive-toned skin glowing despite the tiredness etched in her eyes. She wore jeans and a cardigan, her hair pulled back simply, but there was a warmth to her smile that reminded me of the women I used to teach, strong and hopeful despite everything life demanded of them. When she stepped into the dining room, she froze. The dress lay draped across the table, its silk catching the afternoon sun. "Aunt Linda," she whispered. Emily had already explained that, in their family, everyone older was aunt or uncle, blood or not. The title landed softly in my heart. "Did you really make this?" "I did," I said, my voice catching. "For Rachel." Her face cycled through emotions: wonder, recognition, then a flash of protective anger on my behalf. "She didn't wear it, did she?" She chose something else. Anna reached out, then pulled back as though afraid to mar the fabric. "I can't. This is too beautiful. Too expensive. It belongs in some lavish ballroom, not a backyard barbecue with folding chairs." I found my voice stronger than expected. "Anna, this dress was made with love. It was meant to celebrate a marriage, to make someone feel beautiful on the most important day of their life. That someone could be you." Emily nudged her cousin. "Try it on." Anna hesitated. "I don't want to." "Try it on," I echoed, surprising even myself. 20 minutes later, Anna stood before my bedroom mirror, transformed. The gown fit as though it had been waiting for her. The silk flowed over her curves with liquid grace, the ivory tone warming her skin, the pearls glimmering like stars caught in daylight. Look." Her voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. "I look like a real bride." "You look like yourself," I said gently. "Just elevated." Emily pulled out her phone. "Hold still. I have to capture this miracle." She snapped a photo, the kind that didn't just record an image, but captured something intangible: joy, authenticity, transformation. In that moment, Anna wasn't just a woman in a dress. She was a vision of what love, when honored, could look like. When she finally changed out of the gown, her hands lingered on the fabric as though reluctant to let it go. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Wear it with joy," I told her. "That's thanks enough." But Emily wasn't finished. "Actually," she said, her voice tinged with mischief and determination, "I think people need to see this. Not just us, the world." Oh, my heart lurched. "Emily, relax," she laughed. "Just on my Instagram. I have, like, 300 followers, mostly art students and restaurant people. What's the harm?" Before I could stop her, she had posted the photo, captioned with words that made my throat tighten. "When your cousin needs a wedding dress but can't afford couture, and your friend's mom turns out to be a secret master seamstress. 6 months of love sewn into every stitch by Linda Harris. Retired teacher and hidden artist. Proof that real artistry still exists, in unexpected places." I wanted to scold her, to demand she take it down. But instead, I found myself blinking back tears. For the first time, someone had seen me, not just as a mother, or a widow, or a teacher, but as what I truly was: an artist. When Anna stepped into the gown the second time, it was no longer about fit, it was about destiny. The silk seemed to recognize her, cascading over her body with an ease that made it appear as though I had measured her myself 6 months ago. The pearls caught the late afternoon sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, scattering pinpoints of light across the walls like blessings. For the first time since I had laid the final stitch, I felt the dress fulfill its purpose. It wasn't meant to be stored in tissue paper, hidden in shadows, or dismissed in hotel suites. It was meant to shine. Anna turned toward the mirror, her hands clutching the sides of the bodice as though afraid it might slip away. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and disbelieving. "I can't," her voice broke, and tears pooled at the edges of her eyes. "I can't believe this is me. I look like a real bride." The words pierced me with both pain and pride. Pain, because those were the words I had once dreamed of hearing from Rachel. Pride, because Anna meant them with every ounce of her being. "You don't just look like a bride," I said softly. "You look like yourself, only lifted higher. The woman you already are, just illuminated." Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, tears dripping onto the silk, before she caught them with trembling hands. "I never thought I'd have anything like this. We've been looking at clearance racks and secondhand shops, and I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that the love was what mattered. But this—" She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "This makes me feel like the love I'm giving is being reflected back at me." I swallowed hard, my throat thick with emotion. It was as though the dress had been waiting, not for Rachel, but for Anna, for someone who would honor its story, who would wear it with gratitude rather than embarrassment. Emily, who had been circling like an excited bird, finally blurted, "Hold still. I need a picture." No," Anna protested, laughing through her tears. "I look a mess. You look perfect," Emily said firmly, raising her phone. The click of the camera captured not just an image but a revelation. Anna in the dress, her smile radiant, her posture transformed, her joy undeniable. She turned the screen toward me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The photo was stunning. It wasn't just a bride in a gown. It was a woman stepping fully into her moment, clothed in something born of love and stitched with care. It was the proof I hadn't known I needed, that my work, my devotion, had meaning beyond rejection. Emily's fingers flew over the screen. "I have to post this. The world deserves to see." My heart lurched. "Emily, wait. Relax," she interrupted, grinning. "It's just Instagram. I've got, 300 followers? Mostly baristas and art students. It's not like Vogue is watching." Before I could protest, the photo was up, accompanied by a caption that made my chest ache in the best way. "When your cousin needs a wedding dress but can't afford couture, and your friend's mom happens to be a hidden master seamstress." This gown was hand-sewn over 6 months by Linda Harris, retired teacher with the hands of an artist. Proof that real artistry still exists in unexpected places. She added hashtags. Number handmade couture. Number real bride. Number hidden artist. Then set her phone down with a flourish. Anna gasped. "Emily, what? You look incredible. And maybe someone else out there needs to be reminded that beauty doesn't always come with a 5-figure price tag." I shook my head, half exasperated, half touched. "You young people, and your phones." But when I glanced again at the photo on the screen, I couldn't help the warmth that spread through me. Emily hadn't exaggerated. The dress looked as though it belonged in a glossy magazine, the kind Rachel had pored over during her engagement. Only this wasn't polished artifice. This was real. The next morning I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Confused, I reached for it, expecting perhaps a message from Emily or Anna. Instead, I found dozens of notifications, likes, comments, follows. My heart pounded as I opened Emily's post. Overnight, the photo had been shared, then reshared, gathering momentum like a storm. There were comments from strangers. "This is stunning. Who made it? I'd wear this over any designer gown. Why aren't we celebrating women like this instead of mass-produced labels?" Within hours, the numbers had doubled, then tripled. By evening, the post had been shared hundreds of times, spilling out of Emily's small circle into feeds I couldn't begin to comprehend. Emily showed up at my door breathless, her phone in hand. "It's blowing up. Look, 5,000 views in less than a day." I laughed nervously. 5,000? That can't be real. "Oh, it's real," she said, scrolling through her screen. "I've got brides messaging me asking where they can find you. People are tagging their friends saying, 'This is what I want.' It's insane." I sat heavily in the kitchen chair, stunned. All I had done was what I'd always done, so with care, with love, with precision. Yet suddenly, the world seemed to notice. Anna returned that evening, still flushed with excitement. "My coworkers saw the post," she said breathlessly. "They can't stop talking about it. One of them said I look like I belong in a fairy tale." She hugged me tightly, her tears dampening my shoulder. "Thank you, Aunt Linda. Thank you for giving me this." Her gratitude seeped into the cracks left by Rachel's rejection, filling me with something I hadn't expected. Healing. The wound hadn't vanished, but it no longer bled so freely. Instead, it became part of a larger story, one that was beginning to stretch beyond me. Over the next 2 days, the numbers soared. 10,000 views. Then 20. Emily's phone buzzed constantly with comments and messages from strangers asking if I took commissions, if I sold my work, if I had a website. I didn't. I had only ever sewn out of necessity or love. But for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something more waiting for me than the quiet life of a retired teacher. On the 3rd day, Emily burst into my kitchen with croissants and coffee. "Mrs. Harris," she said, her eyes alight with excitement, "we need to talk about starting a business." I stared at her, my hands still wrapped around the warm mug she'd thrust into them. A business. The word felt foreign, terrifying, exhilarating. But when I looked toward the dining room and saw the gown once more, no longer rejected, no longer hidden, but seen by thousands who recognized its worth, I realized something had already begun. The dress had found its true owner, and in doing so, it had returned me to myself. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever known. My phone, once quiet as the tick of a clock in an empty room, now buzzed constantly with unfamiliar names and urgent requests. Brides-to-be, mothers, friends of friends, each message a variation of the same plea. "Can you make me a dress? Will you create something for me? Please, how soon can I meet you?" At first, I didn't know how to respond. I was used to sewing quietly, invisibly, in the small hours of the night. I had always considered my work an act of love or necessity, not commerce. Yet here were strangers, insisting that what I did had value, real, tangible value worth money and admiration. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Rachel had once done homework as a child, scrolling through messages until my hands shook. Emily, of course, was delighted. She swept into my house daily, with her phone buzzing like a hive, her excitement spilling into every corner of the room. "Mrs. Harris," she said one morning, spreading screenshots across the table. "Look at this, 3 more brides from Portland, 2 from Seattle, 1 from San Francisco. They all saw the photo of Anna. They want to meet you. They're asking about prices, timelines, everything." I stared at her in disbelief. "Emily, I don't know anything about running a business. I've never charged for my work. I don't even know what to ask." Her eyes shone with determination. "Then we'll learn together. You make the dresses, and I'll handle the rest. We can do this." Something about the way she said we sent a tremor of warmth through me. I had spent so many years doing everything alone, raising Rachel, teaching, surviving after Tom's death. But Emily's insistence felt like an outstretched hand, a lifeline. We spent the next week hunched over notebooks and laptops, sketching not just gowns but ideas. Emily pulled out a pad of paper and scrawled names across the top. Soul Stitch, Thread and Grace, Handmade Her. None felt right. Finally, after an evening of tea and nervous laughter, the name came to me as naturally as breath. Stitch and Soul, I said aloud. Emily looked up from her notes, her eyes wide. Then her grin spread like sunlight. Yes, that's it. Because that's what you do, Mrs. Harris. You don't just stitch fabric. You stitch love, memory, identity. You put your soul into every seam. The name stuck. It became our compass, guiding everything we planned. We designed a simple logo, 2 intertwined threads forming the shape of a heart, and Emily built a basic website late at night, her fingers flying across the keyboard while I watched in awe. You need to have photos, she insisted, so we staged an impromptu shoot in my dining room. Anna twirled in the gown. Emily snapped pictures, and I stood in the background, hands trembling, wondering how my quiet home had suddenly transformed into something resembling a studio. And then came the journalists. The first was a local lifestyle blogger who had stumbled across Emily's Instagram post. She called me the hidden couture artist of Portland's suburbs, a phrase that made me laugh and cry all at once. Her article featured photos of Anna in the gown, alongside quotes from Emily about my 6 months of artistry. Within hours of it being published, my inbox doubled again. 2 days later, a reporter from the Oregonian showed up at my doorstep with a photographer in tow. She asked me about my background, my years of teaching, my late husband, the dress Rachel had rejected. I was hesitant at first, but the words poured out of me, surprising in their honesty. When the article ran, the headline read, "From Teacher to Hidden Seamstress. A Mother's Dress Finds a New Bride." By the end of that week, a producer from Channel 7 News left a message on my voicemail. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "Mrs. Harris, we would love to feature your story in our evening segment on local artisans. Please call us back." I sat staring at the phone, my heart thundering. Me? On television? The thought was absurd, terrifying, exhilarating. Emily squeezed my hand. "They called you an artisan," she whispered. "Do you understand what that means? They see what I see." The night of the interview, I dressed carefully in a navy blouse and slacks, smoothing my hair with trembling fingers. The reporter, Betty Reynolds, set up cameras in my dining room, positioning the dress on a mannequin in the background. The lights felt hot, my mouth dry, but when she asked me to explain what sewing meant to me, something inside steadied. "This dress," I said, my hand brushing the silk, "was born out of love. Every stitch is a prayer, every seam, a memory. I never thought of myself as an artist, but when I see how women feel wearing what I've made, maybe that's what artistry is. Making someone see themselves the way love sees them." When the segment aired, my phone didn't stop ringing for 2 days. Neighbors left congratulatory notes in my mailbox. Former students sent emails saying they had always admired my sewing projects in class. Strangers stopped me at the grocery store to say they had cried watching me on television. And the orders kept coming. Brides who wanted something unique. Mothers of the bride desperate for dresses that didn't make them feel invisible. Women who had never felt beautiful in ready-to-wear gowns, begging me to create something that honored their bodies. I should have been overwhelmed. Instead, I felt alive. Emily and I worked side by side at my dining room table, transforming it into a design studio. Bolts of fabric lined the walls, sketch pads filled with ideas stacked beside coffee mugs and pincushions. We developed a rhythm. I sewed. She managed emails and scheduling. She negotiated with fabric suppliers, set up consultations, even designed business cards with our logo. Stitch and Soul, they read in elegant script. Custom couture for real women. And the phrase made me smile every time I handed one out. One afternoon, as I pinned the hem of a gown for a client, Emily looked up from her laptop, her face glowing. "Mrs. Harris, you have a waiting list." "A waiting list?" "2 months long," she laughed. "Do you realize what that means? People are willing to wait for you." I nearly pricked my finger with the needle. The idea that women strangers valued my work enough to wait was something I had never dared imagine. Late at night, when the house grew quiet again, I would sit with a cup of tea and think of Rachel. I wondered if she had seen the articles, the news segment, the photos shared by strangers who praised my work as art. Part of me longed for her to call, to say she was proud. But another part, deeper and stronger, knew that I no longer needed her approval to validate what I had found. For 62 years, I had lived in the shadows of other people's expectations. Now, for the first time, the spotlight was mine, and it wasn't blinding, it was liberating. As the weeks passed, Stitch and Soul became more than a project. It became a lifeline, a declaration, a revolution stitched one seam at a time. I wasn't just sewing gowns. I was stitching together the pieces of myself I had lost along the way. Artist, dreamer, woman with a future yet to unfold. The path had opened, unexpected and frightening and beautiful, and I was ready to walk it. The morning Rachel finally called me, my hands were deep in silk. I was pinning a bodice for a bride named Marissa, a young woman who worked double shifts at the hospital and had saved for months just to commission a gown. My phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with my daughter's name. For a long moment, I stared at it, the needle poised in my fingers. My stomach twisted the way it always did when her name appeared, an instinct born of years of bracing for disappointment. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Rachel." "Mom." Her voice was breathless, pitched higher than usual, the tone she used when she wanted something, but dressed it as enthusiasm. "I saw the news segment and the articles. You're everywhere." I shifted the phone to my shoulder, carefully adjusting the silk so the pins didn't slip. "Yes," I said simply. "It's amazing," she rushed on. "I always knew you were talented. Mark and I were just talking, and we think maybe we can help you, manage things better. You've got all this attention now, and it could really turn into something big if it's handled properly." I paused, my fingers tightening on the fabric. "Handled properly?" "Of course. I mean, it's wonderful, Mom, but you can't keep sewing each dress by hand if you want to make real money. That's not sustainable. Mark says the key is scalability. You should start using more cost-effective fabrics, synthetic blends, wholesale lace, that sort of thing. And maybe streamline the beading. No one really cares if each pearl is sewn by hand as long as it looks good in photos. You could produce 5 times as many dresses and actually build a brand." I closed my eyes. There it was, the voice of dismissal wrapped in the clothing of concern. My daughter's version of help. "Rachel," I said carefully, "what you're describing isn't what I do." Oh, Mom, don't sound so sensitive," she replied, a trace of impatience slipping into her tone. "We're just trying to help you be smart about this. Think about your age. You can't be hunched over a sewing machine for 12 hours a day. You'll wear yourself out. But if you let us help manage it, we can find a balanced quality, but efficient. That way you're not working so hard, and you'll actually make good money." Isn't that what you want? Her words settled on me like ashes, smothering the flame I had fought so hard to kindle. Good money, efficiency, streamlining. Not once did she say artistry, or joy, or soul. No, I said finally, my voice low but steady. That isn't what I want. There was a pause on the line. Mom, don't be stubborn. You've got this momentum now, and it would be such a waste to throw it away because you're clinging to old-fashioned methods. Times have changed. People don't care about hand-stitched hems. They care about the look, the image. Mark works with creative entrepreneurs all the time. He knows what sells. I laid the fabric down and stood, my spine straightening. I'm not interested in what sells, Rachel. I'm interested in what matters. In making women feel beautiful. Because someone took the time to honor their bodies, their stories. That's what this is about. Not profit margins. Her exhale hissed through the line. So what, you're just gonna keep doing this little sewing project in your dining room until you drop? You could build something real if you listened. The words struck sharper than she knew. Little sewing project. As if the recognition, the waiting list, the interviews, all of it was still insignificant, still not enough to earn her respect. I am building something real, I said, each word deliberate. Stitch and Soul is real. My work is real. The women who come to me crying because they finally feel seen, that is real. And I won't cheapen it with shortcuts to make it more palatable for you. Or for Mark. Silence stretched across the line, thick and heavy. Finally, Rachel spoke. Her tone clipped. You're making a mistake. You don't know how business works. You're getting carried away with all this attention. And when it fades, you'll wish you'd listened. Oh, I looked around my dining room at the sketches pinned to the corkboard, the bolts of fabric leaning against the wall, the garment bags waiting for fittings, at Emily's notebook full of plans and schedules, at the dress taking shape under my hands, destined to make a young nurse feel like a queen. This didn't look like a mistake to me. Maybe, I said quietly. Or maybe, for the first time, I'm not listening to fear disguised as advice. Mom, I have to go, Rachel. I have a client fitting in an hour. I ended the call before she could reply. My hands shook as I set the phone down. But beneath the tremor was something stronger. Resolve. That evening, Emily came over with Thai takeout, chattering about fabric suppliers until she noticed my face. She called, didn't she? I nodded. What did she say? That I should use cheaper fabrics, stop hand sewing, let Mark help manage me. Turn this into something scalable. Emily's eyes narrowed. Scalable? This isn't a factory line. This is art. That's what I told her. And? She thinks I'm making a mistake. Emily set her chopsticks down with a sharp clatter. No, Mrs. Harris. The mistake would be listening to her. Look around you. She gestured to the room, to the gowns in progress, the sketches taped to the walls. You're changing lives. Do you know how many brides would kill for the chance to wear something made by your hands? Do you know how rare it is, in a world drowning in mass production, to find something real? Her words wrapped around me like armor. For the first time, I believed them fully. Later that night, lying in bed, I thought of Rachel again. I thought of the little girl who used to crawl under my quilt during thunderstorms, who once clapped her hands in delight when I sewed a Halloween costume out of scraps. Somewhere along the way, that child had been replaced by a woman who measured worth in dollars and efficiency, who saw me as an obligation to manage rather than a person to respect. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it no longer defined me. The next morning, I woke early. Sunlight spilling across my sewing machine. I threaded the needle with steady hands, the hum of the machine rising as fabric slid beneath it. Each stitch was a vow. I would not let Rachel's dismissal shrink me again. I would not surrender this rebirth to fear or convenience or her idea of safety. I was Linda Harris, seamstress and artist, and my work was not for sale to the lowest bidder, not even to my own daughter. The months that followed were a whirlwind I could never have imagined. What began at my dining room table soon outgrew the walls of my home. With Emily's steady encouragement, we found a small studio space downtown, a sunlit loft with exposed brick and tall windows that poured golden light across bolts of fabric and rows of mannequins. The sign on the door read Stitch and Soul, and every time I unlocked it in the morning, I felt a quiet thrill ripple through me. But it wasn't just the space that made me proud. It was the people who filled it. When the orders multiplied beyond my two hands, I refused to chase efficiency through factories. Instead, I reached out to women like me, older seamstresses, widows, retirees whose skills had been dismissed as outdated in a world obsessed with fast fashion. They came with calloused fingers, weary backs, and hearts still aching to create. One by one, they joined me at the long wooden tables, their laughter mingling with the hum of sewing machines. Together, we stitched not just gowns, but dignity reclaimed. Each bride who walked through our doors became part of our story. They came with insecurities, with tight budgets, with quiet hopes, and they left standing taller, wrapped in gowns that told them they mattered. Watching them twirl before the mirrors, tears glistening in their eyes, I felt the ache of my old wound begin to heal. I wasn't just a mother who had once been rejected. I was an artist, a businesswoman, a free woman who had built something with her own hands. The media attention never fully quieted. Sometimes it felt overwhelming, but mostly it was affirming. They called me the silent wedding dress artisan, a title that made me smile because I knew how much noise my work truly carried in the hearts of those who wore it. One afternoon, during yet another interview, the reporter leaned forward and asked the question I had come to expect. "Mrs. Harris, what about the first dress? The one your daughter never wore? Do you see that as a failure?" I paused, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of that moment. For a long time, I had let the rejection define me, shadowing every stitch with pain. But sitting there, surrounded by the hum of a studio that was alive with creation, I finally saw it clearly. I smiled gently. "No," I said, "that was never a failure. That was a gift. Because without that moment, without that pain, I might never have found myself. That dress led me here." The cameras clicked. The reporter nodded, and inside me, a quiet peace settled. For so long, I had been only a mother who sacrificed, who bent herself until she nearly disappeared. But now, I was more. I was Linda Harris, artisan, entrepreneur, and woman reborn. And at 62, I finally understood sometimes rejection isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of freedom. Looking back on everything, I realized that life has a way of turning heartbreak into unexpected blessings. When Rachel rejected the dress I poured my soul into, I thought it was the end of something precious. But it was really the beginning of my own rebirth. What I once saw as failure became the doorway to discovering who I truly am. Not just a mother, not just someone who sacrifices quietly in the background, but a woman with her own gifts, her own voice, and her own place in the world. I've learned that sometimes the people we love most may not see our worth, and that hurts deeply. But their blindness doesn't diminish the value of what we carry inside. Our talents, our passions, our dreams, they remain real, waiting for the right moment and the right people to honor them. To anyone listening, I want you to remember, rejection is not the end. It might be the push you need to step into your own light. Never be afraid to claim your worth, even if it means walking a road without the approval you once longed for. True freedom comes when you finally honor yourself. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.